Hello and welcome to Voices Made Heard. Atheer Shami here, coming at you live and in stereo. For the past couple of weeks, JPS students have been mimicking poetry to make it fit their topics. For the first week, we were supposed to find the funny, which meant choosing a published humorous poem and mimicking it. After lots of looking around, I settled on Messy Room by Shel Silverstein. The poem reads, Whosever room this is should be ashamed. His underwear is hanging on the lamp, his raincoat is there in the overstuffed chair, and the chair is becoming quite mucky and damp. His workbook is wedged in the window, his sweater's been thrown on the floor. His scarf and one ski are beneath the TV, and his pants have been carelessly hung on the door. His books are all jammed in the closet, his vest has been left in the hall. A lizard named Ed is asleep on his bed, and his smelly old sock has been stuck to the wall. Whosever room this is should be ashamed. Donald or Robert or Willie or huh? You say it's mine? Oh dear, I knew it looked familiar. Silverstein begins the poem by shaming the owner of the room and making the speaker appear superior to him. After that, the poet starts to describe the untidy room and all its chaos. However, the last few lines, the author's judgmental tone seems to shift to an accepting and justifying tone. From my point of view, I believe Shel Silverstein's message was to take a step back and not judge everything you see very quickly, because you might not even notice that you are doing the same thing. Through my rewrite of Messy Room, I decided to use the same repetition as the original and started it off in a similar way. After that, I used the same tone the poet did and tried to mimic it by stating all the problems that are in today's society relating to anxiety and panic attacks. Finally, I mimicked Silverstein's in my final few lines by realizing it's our society, therefore it's okay. My poem reads, Whosever societies this is should be ashamed. They're gossiping in every town, they're causing a stigma acting like it's a clown. They're turning a blind eye to every tear, causing kids to break down to the floor, ignoring the feel. They're laughing behind every door, acting like no one's breaking down. They said the stigma is dead. Just calm down, they said. Control it, they repeat. They're praying eyes waiting for that tear, that shake, that stutter. Whosever societies this is should be ashamed. America or France or Germany or huh? You say it's ours? Oh dear, I knew it looked familiar. For the following week's challenge, we were to find an emo or gothic poem to relate to our subtopics. I decided to use 3 questions by Lang Leave. Although it's short, the poem carries a lot of meaning. In her poem, Leaf starts the first line of each stanza asking a question that the speaker is figuratively asked by an emotion. The first 2 stanzas have a relatively positive tone. However, as the poem progresses to the third stanza, the emotions get deeper and darker. The speaker refers to the experience in the past tense, which can perhaps show that these emotions are over and have been dealt with. The poet conveys the pain and agony of parting when the speaker says, It was like hearing every goodbye ever said to me, said all at once. Goodbyes are very hard to make, and some argue it is the hardest thing to do. Therefore, when a speaker says that it was like feeling the pain of more than one goodbye, an image of hurt and grief is created for the reader. The poem reads, What was it like to love him? Asked Gratitude. It was like being exhumed, I answered, and brought to life in a flash of brilliance. What was it like to be loved in return? Asked Joy. It was like being seen after a perpetual darkness, I replied. To be heard after a lifetime of silence. What was it like to lose him? Asked Sorrow. There was a long pause before I responded. It was like hearing every goodbye said to me, said all at once. I will now read my poem so that we can compare the two. What was it like to breathe in? Asked Sickness. It was like taking a step towards sunshine with the sun's rays against your skin. What was it like to relax? Asked Happiness. It was like being reborn without a single care in the world, like a newborn baby inhaling their first breath. What was it like to suffocate? Asked Pain. I stood there thinking carefully before I replied. It was like drowning in a pool of air. In three questions, Langley begins with a metaphorical question that reveals the speaker's emotions. Therefore, I decided to mimic this technique and begin my lines similarly. My speakers also asking questions, then naming characteristics instead of emotions that asked it. These characteristics contrast my personal theme of panic attacks by offering stages of being completely opposite to those experienced by a person with a panic disorder. Secondly, I did not notice any rhyme in Leaf's poem, and so I decided not to rhyme mine either. The tone in the original poem starts off loving and sweet, but later changes to a dark and hurt tone as she explains her loss. I've mimicked the same method, also increasing the degrees of intensity in the last stanza. The third week came along, and so did the new challenge, You've Been Slammed. This challenge requires you to dig deep and pour out all that you feel in perhaps more angry tone than the other poetry styles. I really enjoyed a poem called Somewhere in America, so I decided to mimic it. The poem reads, Here in America, in every single state, they have a set of standards for every subject, a collection of lessons that the teachers require to teach by the end of the term. But the greatest lessons you'll ever teach us will not come from your syllabus. The greatest lessons you'll ever teach us, you'll not even remember. You never told us what we weren't allowed to say, we just learned how to hold our tongues. Now, somewhere in America, there's a child holding a copy of Catcher in the Rye, and there's a child holding a gun. But only one of those things have been banned by their state government, and it's not the one that can rip through flesh, it's the one that says F you on more pages than one. Because we must control what the people say and how they think. And if they want to become the overseer of their own selves, then we'll show them a real one. And somewhere in America, there's a child sitting on his mother's computer reading the homepage of the KKK's website that's open to the public. But that child would never have read To Kill a Mockingbird because the school has banned it for the use of the N word. We were taught that just because something happens doesn't mean you are to talk about it. But we were taught that it's better to be silent than to make them comfortable. Somewhere in America discusses life lessons and their importance. It also holds up a mirror showing what we are really doing. We spend hours in school trying to jam in as much information as we can, yet it's the kind of information that teaches how to write a lab report rather than how to communicate with others. In the poem, the writer conveys that we are only being told a fraction of the truth rather than all of it. We lie to ourselves and say that life is perfect. There's no poverty or hunger. This poem explores a series of controversial topics like gun violence and privileged rich kids. In a short yet deep way, it also touches on racism and judgment. I'll now read my mimicked poem so we can compare and contrast the two. Here in Saudi, in every single region, they have a set of standards for every household. A set of morals that the parents are expected to teach to their kids when they reach 18. But the greatest lessons you'll ever teach will not come from society's manual. The greatest lessons you'll ever teach your kids are the ones you do not recall learning. You never told us that some people are a little different, that our words and actions can lead to emotional pain. Now, somewhere in America, a teenage boy is fistfighting, and another is gasping for air. But only one of them is giving judgmental looks and being labeled feminine. And it's not the one that lands hundreds in hospital beds. All of this is because society has a different set of rules for every gender. Society thinks that you're overreacting when you claim you're not shaking on purpose. Somewhere in Saudi, there's a child suffocating on the floor of a bathroom, but when she speaks out, she's handed the Quran and a set of prayers and told that she must have done something wrong for Allah to bring this upon her. We are taught that just because something awful happens doesn't mean you are to talk about it, that it's better to be silent than to make anyone uncomfortable with their words so that later they can emphasize the bad. Later on, it starts to blame the society for not telling us certain things, like that not everyone is identical. As the poem progresses, an example is brought up comparing two children and how a book is banned yet a harmful weapon are free to the public. I mimicked that when I brought up the teenage boy with the one fist fighting and the other is having a panic attack, not being able to breathe in. Both poems finally finish with how adults shush us and ignore our complaints just to make sure no one gets uncomfortable. This poem shows the harsh reality of what happens in real life and how we are given a sugar coated version of reality. Now, we finally reached the ending to this poem podcast in year. But I strongly hope that we also bring an end to the stigma around panic attacks and any mental illness. Now, please don't forget to like, share, and comment. Until next time.